y'all. Welcome and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan, and here we talk about all things spooky, and I would love to have you here if that sounds cool. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, obviously, Patreon, and TikTok. I will link all of that below, as well as where to send your own stories if you would like for me to read them. Now, I have been getting consistently asked, which I love, to post longer videos of story times. So in the spirit of spooky season, I am here to deliver, and I have picked quite a few long, scary stories that have been sent in to me to read today. So get cozy, turn on a light, get a snack, get a drink, because I do not know how long we're gonna be here, but I know it's gonna be for a second. All right, let's get into it. Hello, Eric, Morgan, and the cats. Pete, a shout out. Oh, you know what that means. I gotta bring you into the camera. Can I just hold you like this while I read the story? Is that okay? She never lets me hold her, so we're just gonna sit here while it happens. While I am not holding her in my arms, she is sitting beside of me, so she is close by. I followed you for a while and really appreciate you sharing your stories as well as others. I've only told a handful of people some of my experiences, and I finally decided to share some of my past and current stories. I'll start with some of my past and more heartfelt stories. I apologize in advance if these are a bit rambly. For as long as I can remember, I've experienced different kinds of dreams. The best way that I can describe the differentiation is like my dreams have different filters on them. My premonition dreams have a white cloudiness around them, and whenever I dream of deceased loved ones, the background has more of a blurry effect. I'm always somewhere I would frequent with the person or a place that frequented while they were still alive. I'm telling you all of this as it directly relates to my stories. Here's the first story. Trigger warning, this does mention a potential miscarriage. For context, while I've always believed in the paranormal, I did not experience anything on the paranormal spectrum besides my dreams until I was 18. In 2012, I had just moved in with my boyfriend at the time, and he lived on an acre of property that had 2 houses on it. The property was shared with his family. His mother lived in the house towards the back of the property, and we lived in the front house with his older brother. When I first moved in, they had warned me that their property was haunted. However, it was only their grandmother who had lived on the property before her passing, and not to worry. I'm an empath and never had any bad feelings there, so I wasn't too concerned about it. My first experience was at my ex-mother-in-law's house, the back house. I was helping her put away dishes or whatever, and I felt the cupboard opened after I'd put some cups up. After I walked away, the cupboard door slammed shut on its own. It startled me. So we were the only 2 people in the house at the time, and we both had been a good 3 to 4 feet away from what it was when it closed. That was when she told me her mother, boyfriend's grandma, had a pet peeve of doors being left open, and this included the cupboards. This happened on and off the entire time we lived there, and I eventually got used to it. If I ever needed to leave a door open, I would have to address her and tell her why I was leaving the door open in order for it to not be closed. Well, later his grandmother visited me in a dream. It was shortly after I found out that I was pregnant with our first child. I was having a lot of complications and was at risk of miscarrying. Since it was very early in my pregnancy, there wasn't much my doctor could do, so we were having to wait and see. I was very stressed out and sad at the time. Well, one day, after another not-so-good doctor appointment, I went home and took a nap. This is when I dreamt of her. I had never met this grandmother. She'd passed years before I had met him, and she only spoke Spanish, which I did not understand at the time. In my dream, we were in the back house, and she was sitting in the rocking chair my ex-mother-in-law had in her living room, which I found out later had actually belonged to his grandma. She told me not to worry, that she would be okay. I woke up from that nap feeling more at ease. The farther along that I got in my pregnancy, the symptoms that were causing concerns lessened, and 9 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. In 2019, my great-grandmother, who I was extremely close to, passed away from Parkinson's and dementia. On the day of her passing, I went to visit her in the morning, while my mother stayed with my 3 kids. Due to my youngest being sick, I was not able to take my children with me to the nursing home. I had to leave before I wanted to that day. Whenever I returned home, I accidentally fell asleep while laying down with my sick kiddo. While sleeping, I started dreaming. I was with my great-grandma in her kitchen at the house she lived in while I was growing up. The house had been sold a year prior to this, and I had not previously had a dream being there. In this dream, she was younger, the age she was whenever I was around 3 years old, and she kept telling me how much she loved me. Whenever she touched my hand, it felt surreal. I was woken up a couple seconds later by my mother letting me know that my grandma had just passed. I believed that she was coming to tell me goodbye because of the filter on my dream, as well as the lingering feeling of the hand where she had touched me in my dream. Since then, she has visited me several times in my dreams, usually in times of stress. However, the last time I believe she visited me in person. I've always struggled with depression, and in late January of 23, I was having an unusually hard time managing it. During this time, I was living upstairs at my parents' house with my 4 kids. My room was the smallest, as my kids had to share rooms. It also happened to be the room at the very top of the stairs and directly across the hall from the bathroom. In my room, my bed was directly across the wall from my bedroom door. My kids were very little at the time, so every night the bathroom light was left on to help them find their way in the middle of the night if they needed me, and because of this, the door was always cracked very little to prevent the light from shining into my room. Well, One night at around 4:30 in the morning, I was up by myself, laying in bed, hugging her old sweater, thinking about everything I was dealing with, as well as how much I missed her. Growing up, she was the one person who I felt that I could talk to about anything and never worried about being judged. All these thoughts eventually brought me to tears. Shortly after I started crying, I heard footsteps slowly coming up the stairs. At first, I thought I was imagining things, or that one of my kids were going downstairs for a glass of water. That's when my door started to creak open, letting the light from the bathroom flood in. I clearly could see that no one was opening that door. My heart was pounding, especially when I felt weight on the edge of my bed. By my legs, it felt like someone was sitting right next to me. But again, I could clearly see that no one was there. I froze, not wanting to react, something I learned from a previous paranormal experience, but that's a story for another day. And then what felt like arms wrapped around each side of my body, one by my abdomen and one closer to my hips. When I felt this pressure, I instantly knew it was my great-grandma because of the warmth and love that I had felt while this was happening. Whenever the pressure released, I was finally able to sleep, and I definitely felt much better. I haven't dreamt of her or felt her since then. I think her visiting me like that required a lot of energy. Either that or another family member needs her more than I do right now. She always said her family was the greatest treasure, and I truly believe that she's still looking after all of us. Thank you for taking the time to read my stories, and I apologize if they were unorganized. I do have more heartfelt stories as well as some scary ones, and I'd be happy to share those as well. Please share them. That one was, oh no. That one was so nice. All right, let's get into the second story. I've had many experiences in my life, and there's definitely something attached to me, but here's one story that I can't forget about. For some backstory, my parents purchased a vacation cabin not quite in the middle of the woods, but more empty fields and farmland. They purchased this cabin in 2012, and we would go there every weekend. When they first purchased it, walking in, you always felt like someone was watching you, but I was always trying to be optimistic. It also needed a lot of work, hence on why we were there every weekend. Here and there, you would hear scratching on the walls late at night and or people I knew that weren't in the house calling out to you. One specific weekend, we had family over, and it was midsummer, and we were all by the fire pit up until about midnight. I remember it being midnight because my family said it was way past our bedtime. As we were going to bed and settling in, we were coming up with sleep arrangements because there were so many of us, and this was not a small cabin. To give you an idea, it had 2 living rooms, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a laundry room, and a gaming room. One bedroom was downstairs and one queen-size bed in it. It was the smallest out of the 4 bedrooms. Up the stairs were 2 bedrooms directly on the right and left at the top of the stairs. If you opened the doors to the bedrooms, you would see in them because they were directly aligned with each other. They had queen-size beds in them and dressers just to give you an idea of how big the rooms were. Getting back to the story, we'd figured out our sleeping arrangement. 4 of my cousins were sleeping in the living room downstairs, the adults beside my parents were sleeping in the room on the left, and I was on the right. We didn't have an AC at the time, so we had all the windows open at night to keep things cool. So as I'm going to bed, I'm sleeping in the bed closest to the door. My cousins were sleeping in the same room, and we slept on the bed furthest from the door. My cousins were sleeping in the same room as me in the bed furthest from the door. As we walked into the room, I closed and locked the door. I do it as a precaution because I've experienced some things. We get in bed and we turn off the lights. As we're laying in there, we're just laughing, making jokes, and talking when I hear a click of the door opening. In my head, I'm thinking one of my cousins got up to go to the bathroom, but they're still talking to each other. So I look over my shoulder to see if anyone is there, and there's no one, but the door's wide open. I was frozen. I whispered to my cousins in the bed next to me to get their attention to look over at that door. They shined their phone light over to the door and played it off as if I didn't shut it all the way, and that the wind pushed it open. Mind you, that door opens into the room, not out. Everyone else's doors were closed. I explained to them that I shut and locked that door. The room was silent until we hear the little girl's giggles. Like there were multiple of them. My cousins, we will call Jake and Paul, start yelling to knock it off and that it isn't funny, thinking it was their sisters pulling a prank on us because they were sleeping downstairs in the living room. While they were talking, the giggles stopped and I went silent, till it started again and I was frozen in fear. I couldn't move my body at all. My cousins told me to shut the door and turn off the light, but I couldn't move. I get the strength to only look over my shoulder at the door, and I see something darker than the dark in the hallway staring at us. When I said something, we were all panicking. I explained to them that Jake should shut the door while Paul turns on the light. After arguing while hearing giggling, they finally did it. So we stayed up all night, and the next morning we asked their sisters if they pulled a prank on us. Me hoping that it was the case, but it wasn't, and we never spoke of it again. Alright, story number 3. Good gosh. I have 4 stories and some family history of spooky happenings that I'd like to get your opinions on. I don't know what may have caused them, but I think they're probably paranormal or spiritual. I subscribe to a Christian belief system, so this is my view on it, but I'd also love to know what you think. Here's the first story. I used to live in a house on a large piece of property and still visit because my dad lives there. In the sunroom of that house, you could look right out into the backyard where a big oak tree was clearly visible. Every time it would rain, I'd see this old man face appear in the tree. It only ever appeared when it's rained. It was big and very clearly a face, and I've gone out many times to see if I could get a close look at it, but never saw anything. To this day, I have no idea what it was. I attached a picture of it in this email. Second story. A collection of stories from my mom's creepy room growing up in Siberia. The clocks in my mom's room would never last long, breaking with such frequency that her brother took to getting her clocks for all gift-getting occasions. They were old-fashioned clocks, not digital, with actual clock hands that ticked. They would sit in her room for a while before starting to tick backwards and eventually breaking. This happened with every clock that was brought into her room. It became a casual thing for her family, so her mom and my grandma told her coworkers about it. And of course none of them believed her, so the next day she brought up the clock into work to prove it. As Murphy's Law dictates, the clock worked fine and ticked forward at work, but the second it was brought back into my mom's bedroom, it went back to ticking backwards. My grandma always loved to put potted plants around her apartment, including in my mom's bedroom, when my mom was a child. Always the plants would die, even though my grandmother would take good care of them and is known for having a green thumb. When they were half dead, my grandma would take the plants out of my mom's room, and after a few days they'd be back to 100% health. Then they would be brought back into my mom's room and they'd barely be clinging to life once again, to the point that my grandma thought my mom was poisoning the plants. She was not. She's just really good at killing plants by existing near them. To this day, she struggles to make anything grow and refuses to take plants because she doesn't want to kill them. She raised me just fine though, so it doesn't apply to people. I'm really great with plants and have witnessed my mom handing over dying plants to me that she's gotten as gifts for me to revive, and she doesn't touch them. She loves plants and always asks me to bring plants into our living space and take care of them because she can. Another story about my mom's room. For many nights, my mom would hear scratching under her bed and she thought it was a mouse, but when her dad set up traps, nothing was called. Finally, she'd had enough because she couldn't sleep, so she looked under the bed and all she found were things that can best be described as the petal of a pine cone. Being the good big sister that she is, she decided to do an experiment and secretly snuck it under her brother's bed that night. The next morning, he came to her distraught, saying that there was a mouse under his bed. She was shocked and told him what she did. She wanted to experiment with it more, but her brother was scared and made her throw it away. Story 3. My mom's childhood encounter with a witch growing up in Siberia. My mom and her cousin heard a witch lived in their apartment building. The witch was known for telling the future and other things that aren't super positive, cursing people who upset her. My mom and her cousin were bored kids, so they went to go knock on her door. As soon as my mom touched her knuckles to that door, a strong, invisible force flung them back from the door, throwing her onto the back of the floor. To this day, my mom thinks some otherworldly force, an angel, aggressive love, was protecting her by keeping her from communicating with that witch because she wasn't a malevolent being. Story number 4. My grandmother, who lived in Russia's little house spirit. My grandmother's apartment had always been signs of having a little house spirit. They're known for being mischievous in Russia and playing tricks on the homeowner if they're a bad person, but if you're a good person, they would be nice, clean up, and return lost things. It made itself known by making loud banging noises from behind the fridge, and the cat often stares behind the fridge and hisses at it, even sometimes running away when the banging starts. My grandfather didn't believe it until he heard the banging for the first time and freaked out. My grandmother's also been able to ask generally to the house and its spirit to return lost things because she needs them back and she's glad it's had its fun. Mysteriously, the things would always show up, plain sight, the next day. The history of my mom's side of the family, if you're interested. The women on my mom's side of the family, me included, Irish and Russian heritage, made me inherit a lot of folklore. I've always had some strange gifts. They have all collectively agreed that we probably have the gift of foresight from God. My great-great-grandmother, who I'm named after, used to be able to predict where lost livestock would run off to, and was able to predict what day her son would be home from war alive. My grandma used to have dreams as a kid, but stopped believing she had a gift, so she can't do it anymore. My mom has dreams and used to be able to focus and know what outcome of each choice she made when she was younger. She'd do this a lot when she wasn't sure what the right decision in a situation was. I also have these dreams, and I have extremely good intuition about dangerous people and places. I also have an experience that is best described as astral projection. Those are spooky. Well, anyways, that is all for today. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. And this video did not end up as long as I thought it would be. I thought it would be like 20 plus minutes. So we might do a longer one next week. But please send in those stories so that I have stories to make a long video with. All right, that is all for today, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.